Trump hints at years-long U.S. oversight of Venezuela. Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump has indicated that the United States may maintain significant control over Venezuela's governance and oil industry for years, following the removal of longtime leader Nicolas Maduro, marking a dramatic shift in Washington's engagement with the South American nation. Reuters plus E1. Speaking in a wide-ranging interview with the New York Times published on January 8, 2026, Trump declined to commit to a timeline for how long the United States might oversee political and economic decisions in Venezuela. Pressed on whether U.S. involvement would last months or years, Trump replied simply, "I would say much longer." Investing.com. Trump described U.S. plans to rebuild Venezuela in what he called a very profitable way, saying Washington would tap into the country's vast oil reserves, one of the largest in the world, to benefit both nations. "We're going to be using oil, and we're going to be taking oil," he said, adding that increased oil activity would help reduce global oil prices and provide funds that Venezuela desperately needs. Investing.com. Background: Maduro's capture and interim government. The comments come after a U.S. military operation on January 3rd resulted in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, who were flown to the United States to face charges including narco-terrorism. Reuters. Following Maduro's ouster, Delcy Rodriguez, his deputy, was sworn in as interim president. The United States has maintained that it is working with interim authorities, though Rodriguez has insisted there is no foreign power governing Venezuela. L'Orient today. A three-phase U.S. strategy. U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have outlined what they describe as a three-phase plan for Venezuela's future: stabilization, prevent the country from collapsing into chaos and establish order; recovery, rebuild infrastructure and the economy, especially the oil sector; transition, ultimately return full control to Venezuelan authorities. Time. Rubio emphasized that during the stabilization phase, the United States will take control over Venezuelan oil flows and work to sell oil that has been trapped in the country due to sanctions and transport restrictions. "They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned," Rubio said. Reuters. Oil at the center. Venezuela's massive oil reserves are central to the U.S. plan. Trump has said the United States will soon receive between 30 million and 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude, which will be sold at market prices, with proceeds controlled by Washington and distributed at its discretion. Reuters. Administration officials say managing the country's oil sales will help stabilize Venezuela and fund reconstruction efforts. They have also seized multiple oil tankers connected with sanctioned Venezuelan crude since the blockade was imposed. Al Jazeera. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has indicated that the United States will control Venezuelan oil sales indefinitely, first selling the stored crude and then future production. CBS News. Reactions and challenges. The United States' expanded role has stirred debate both domestically and internationally. Critics argue that direct control of another country's resources raises serious legal and ethical concerns, and some lawmakers in the U.S. Congress have moved to challenge further military or economic intervention. Spectrum. Local news. International reactions include criticism from global powers and growing tensions as Washington asserts its influence over Venezuela's political future. Sky News. Venezuelans inside the country face uncertainty, with reports indicating economic collapse and humanitarian strain due to sanctions and the political upheaval, a situation that poses significant challenges to stabilization efforts. The Washington Post. What comes next? Trump's comments suggest that the U.S. role in Venezuela is likely to be long-term and deeply involved, particularly in economic matters tied to oil production and revenue. While officials frame the strategy as a path toward eventual Venezuelan self-governance, the lack of a defined timeline underscores the unpredictable nature of the transition ahead. For now, the United States appears prepared to guide Venezuela's political and economic recovery much longer than initially anticipated, raising questions about sovereignty, resource control, and geopolitical strategy in the Western Hemisphere. America's long shadow over Venezuela, inside Washington's plan to run a nation's future. Chapter 1. A country that collapsed in slow motion. For more than 2 decades, Venezuela had been a warning sign to the world. Once the richest nation in South America, sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, Venezuela slowly collapsed under corruption, sanctions, economic mismanagement, and political repression. Inflation reached millions of percent. Supermarket shelves emptied. Millions fled across borders into Colombia, Brazil, and beyond. By 2025, Venezuela was no longer a functioning state. It was a humanitarian disaster. And then, on January 3, 2026, everything changed. Before dawn, U.S. Special Forces entered Caracas under heavy air cover. Within hours, Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's president for more than a decade, was in American custody, flown to New York to face federal charges of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and money laundering. For the first time in modern history, the United States had removed a sitting Latin American president by force, and Washington had no intention of leaving quickly. Chapter 2. Trump's Vision. A New American Protectorate. In his nearly 2-hour interview with the New York Times, President Donald Trump spoke bluntly. No diplomatic language, no political euphemisms. "We will rebuild it in a very profitable way," Trump said. "We're going to be using oil. We're going to be taking oil. We're getting oil prices down, and we're going to be giving money to Venezuela, which they desperately need." When asked how long the U.S. would remain in charge of Venezuela's political and economic systems, Trump responded, "Only time will tell, but I would say much longer." Inside the White House, officials privately described the operation as the largest foreign reconstruction mission since Iraq and Afghanistan, but designed to make money instead of costing it. Venezuela is not just a humanitarian mission. It is an oil mission. Venezuelans inside the country face uncertainty, with reports indicating economic collapse and humanitarian strain due to sanctions and the political upheaval, a situation that poses significant challenges to stabilization efforts. The Washington Post. What comes next? Trump's comments suggest that the U.S. role in Venezuela is likely to be long-term and deeply involved, particularly in economic matters tied to oil production and revenue. While officials frame the strategy as a path toward eventual Venezuelan self-governance, the lack of a defined timeline underscores the unpredictable nature of the transition ahead. For now, the United States appears prepared to guide Venezuela's political and economic recovery much longer than initially anticipated, raising questions about sovereignty, resource control, and geopolitical strategy in the Western Hemisphere.